All right, welcome to part two, where we're talking about the co-publishing agreement. And right now we're talking about dollars and some methods of trying to arrive at a figure to pay in advances. As I said, widely varied depending upon the type of songwriter you're talking about. With respect to artist songwriters, there was generally, over the last few years, prior to record sales cratering, there was kind of a rule of thumb that publishers would use in order to try to determine a range for an advance for an artist-songwriter. And it was based upon projecting how many albums they would sell, because that was the currency, was albums, and based upon the confidence level that you might have in them selling that projected number of albums, which was a guess, an estimate based upon their prior success or based upon artists like them, etc. And so what publisher would try to do is try to figure out, all right, how many records do we think somebody's going to sell? And how much will that generate in mechanical royalties? And then let's use a percentage of those mechanical royalties to determine how much we think we're going to pay them in advances. So I think I've given you an example here. Generally speaking, what they try to do is arrive at a figure somewhere between 50% and 70% of what you anticipated that record would generate in mechanical royalties. So if you were signing an artist-songwriter and you projected them to sell 1 million units, and they wrote every song on their album, 100%, and there's 10 songs on the album, and the artist is being paid not the full rate, because generally speaking, artists were never paid the full rate for their compositions, as we'll learn next week. They're paid the 3/4 rate. So if we have an artist who wrote all 10 songs, licenses them to the record company, so the record company can put out that record at the 3/4 rate, and we anticipate they're going to sell 1 million records, how much will that generate in mechanical royalties? Well, I have a little figure here for you. It's 10 songs times the 3/4 rate. I put a percentage in there rather than a dollar sign, but you can see. I hope you're looking at your outline right now. 10 songs times the 3/4 rate, which is 0.06825 cents, just under 7 cents a song, times 10 songs, times 1 million units. What would that add up to? Can you do that yourself? Because we're going to be dealing with a lot of these kind of calculations in the next couple of weeks. So that's about 68 cents per record times 1 million records. The figure is $682,500. That's how much, if this record were sold by the record company and they sold 1 million copies, that's how much they'd owe to this artist publisher in mechanical royalties, because they had to pay approximately 68 cents per record in mechanicals for those 10 songs. So if you anticipated that somebody was going to sell 1 million units, you would base your advance on somewhere between 50 to 75% of what those anticipated mechanicals are. So I don't think I filled this out for you, but 50% of 682,500 is $341,250. 75% of that anticipated money would add up to $511,875, and so you would try to calculate a range of that. So the dickering, the negotiation, would be between, is it going to be the lower side if we agreed on this million, or on the upper side, based upon how reasonable you think your guess is and how confident you think those records will sell, the bargaining power of the parties, people bidding against each other. So you might offer that artist in advance of $400,000. Now, it's unusual for somebody to anticipate to sell 1 million records. It's more unusual now, obviously, but even back in the day, especially for a new artist. So when I talked about 50 Cent getting $1 million in advances, well, that's because the record company and the publishing company anticipated that he was going to sell about 2 million records. Now, it's unusual for a new artist, but it was an unusual situation with 50 Cent, is that he was involved with Eminem, who was the hottest recording artist of a decade surrounding 50 Cent. Dr. Dre, Interscope Records, which is the most powerful label out there. He had a reputation and some PR about getting shot 6 times. That doesn't hurt. I mean, the shooting might, but it doesn't hurt your advances. And he had a song that used the phrase bottle in a bub So they had a confidence level that he was going to move a few million units, and he did. And so that $1 million in advances was warranted. As record sales started to diminish in the aughts and in the early tens, decade, the percentage they used to estimate what the advances would be 30 to 50% of the anticipated mechanical. So in that case, you'd say, what's 50%? That's 341,250 again. And what's 30%? Well, that's 204,750. So these later on, after they got more conservative because record sales really diminished, they started to use 30 to 50%. So they might try to negotiate an advance somewhere in that. So you can put that in the blank there for study purposes, and then we'll probably do a worksheet together to figure out if you get this stuff down. Today, since record sales are almost non-existent, they use some kind of streaming number, which is much less than mechanicals used to be, and figure out if they put this record out, this album, or even an EP or a single, what is that likely to generate in streaming royalties, and then basing the advance on a percentage of that. And as we're still in this early phase of streaming, it's probably in the 30 to 50% range. As streaming starts to get more robust and predictable, it'll probably revert back to the 50 to 75%. So, in other words, if I'm going to offer an advance under a co-publishing agreement to an artist-songwriter, I'm going to think about, well, what is he likely to generate in mechanical royalties for this album, or streaming royalties today, which they're calling mechanical royalties, and I'm going to base my advance on a percentage of what I anticipate they will generate. Is that clear? I hope so. It's clear to me, but I know about this stuff. All right, we also have the concept of proration, which comes into play again. It comes into play in lots of different circumstances, so just get used to it. Proration in terms of how much somebody's going to be paid in advances. When you negotiate these deals up front for an artist-songwriter, you're not necessarily sure how many songs the artist is going to have on that album, or how many songs that artist will have written on that album, or how much a percentage of each individual song that artist-writer you're signing is going to have. So what you're going to do is you're going to base your advance upon a specific number of wholly written songs, and then if it turns out when the record comes out that it's fewer than that number of wholly written songs that appear on the album, the advance is going to be prorated accordingly. So if you said, I'll give you $100,000 for 10 wholly written songs on that record, and the artist delivers 10 songs that they've written on that album, you're going to give them the whole $100,000. If they only record 8 of their own songs and cover 2 songs, they're only going to get 80%, 8 out of 10. It's the same fraction, that 100,000 times a fraction, the numerator of which is the number of songs the artist has on the album, 8, and the denominator of which is the total number of songs, so it'd be 100,000 times 8/10 equals 80,000. Or in another example, here we go, another one. An artist-songwriter were offered $160,000 based upon delivering 4 wholly written songs, because really nobody delivers 10 wholly written songs anymore. 4 wholly written songs on that album. What if he only had 3 wholly written songs on the album? You take that $160,000 and you multiply it times a fraction. What is that fraction? It's 3 wholly written songs as opposed to the 4, the denominator, the 4 that he was required to deliver. So 160,000 times 3/4 is 120,000. Is that right? Did I do that right? Yes, 120,000. So, do you have that? 120. Let's do it again. What if he only had 1 wholly written songs and 2 songs co-written equally with another writer? Well, that would mean there's 1 wholly written song, then there's another wholly written song by virtue of having 2 half-written songs. So that's 2 total. 2, the equivalent of 2 wholly written songs. Out of 4 he was committed, so it's 160,000 times 2 over 4. 2/4 or 1/2 of 160,000 is 80,000. And as I mentioned to you, we'll probably do some of these again just to make sure that you're clear on how that worked. You also need to be very careful about how these advances are dispersed. That is, there will be something in there saying, when do you get this money? And 2 things I think to keep in mind, in addition to getting as much money as possible, because You want that money in your pocket. Everybody likes money, but it also indicates that there's some degree of commitment on the part of the publisher. Similarly, you want that money to get to you as quickly as possible now. Not just how much, but how fast do I get it? And there are various benchmarks, and you got to negotiate this. You're going to get a certain percentage of these advances at various trigger points. Triggers, there are going to be points in time that trigger the obligation of the publisher to pay you some money. And you're going to break it up into maybe half and half, quarter, third. And what you want to do as the writer is you want to get that money as soon as possible. From a publisher's point of view, you want to reduce your risk, so you don't want to give all that money all at once, and then nothing happens, and you will have lost all that money. So the common, it's just going to be negotiated, that's all I can tell you. But the common triggering points is number one, upon execution of the agreement. So you should make sure, as a writer, that you get some substantial amount when you sign the agreement, because you may never see any money ever again. Plus your lawyer is going to make sure that you get that money early, because they're going at execution, because they're going to want to be paid for their work out of that initial advance. So if you negotiate an advance for $200,000, maybe you get 50 right up front. Then there's going to be other points. It could be when you commence recording, when you go into the studio, you get another 25%, who knows. When you deliver the record to the record company, here you go. Could be another chunk, a third, quarter, a fifth. And the important point for the publisher is upon release of the record, because that's when they're relatively certain that at least it's going to be in the marketplace and has a chance to earn some money. Before that occurs, there's no guarantee that any record even comes out. So upon execution, commencement of recording, delivery of the record, release of the record, those are the most common triggers to a portion of the payment. And it's up to the dynamic of the negotiation to figure what that's going to be. Also, the second point about these disbursements is make sure that they are relatively definite points in time, and you can do that as well as these events triggering. You can say, I get this much on January 14th, this much here, this much 2 weeks after delivery of the record. So make sure that there's a definite obligation in there that at some point in time that money has to be released. And if there are triggers like that, make sure you have as much control as possible over those triggers. So if you're getting paid money on commencement of recording, make sure that contractually in your recording agreement you have a mechanism by which you can force the record company to commence recording. Or delivery obviously you have some measure of control of. Release of the record, make sure there's a release obligation on the part of the record company in your recording deal, so that you have control of the trigger. So it's an important thing to keep in mind with triggers. It's trigger, Roy Rogers horse, is if there are things that are triggering things that you want to have happen, try to ensure to the greatest extent possible, it's not always possible, that you have some measure of control over that trigger, that trigger is going to occur. Alright, so that's all about advances. Next, we have royalties. Those are important too, ain't they? Now, as we have discussed many times, we have this big publishing pie, and it consists of 100% of the money. 50% we know is the writer's share. As far as the publisher's share, that's what's going to be divided here in this agreement. And generally speaking, not by any stretch of the imagination always, but very frequently that division of income is 50-50, that is 25-25. Do you understand those percentages? Because sometimes, especially when you're talking about performance money, you split the writer's share 50%, publisher's share 50%, and that equals 100. Yay! But then other times when you're talking about these particular shares, you will hear people speak about the writer's share being 100% of the writer's share and the publisher's share being 100% of the publisher's share. That's the way the PROs deal with it. So that it adds up to 200. And in this agreement, you can see a little bit of that occurring. Is that it's saying they're sharing the money 50-50. What they're sharing is the publisher's share 50-50, which is essentially 25 and 25 of the total income. Is that clear? Is that clear? I hope so. Anyway, so it's usually equal, that 50-50, but doesn't need to be. It could be different based upon bargaining power. That is, somebody's entering into this agreement as a writer. They don't really want to do this co-pub deal. They'd rather do an admin deal, but the publisher's throwing a whole bunch of money at them. And they say, okay, well, let's do it, but I get 60% of the income and you get 40% of the publisher's share of the income. Or it could be the reverse, is that the publisher wants to give them a full publishing agreement, some kind of writer, with a little success but not a lot. And the writer's saying, I want a co-pub deal. And they go, okay, but in order for this to work for us, we want 70% of the publisher's share, and you get 30% of the publisher's share. So it's altogether possible based upon negotiation and, of course, the bargaining power of the parties, which determines almost everything in an agreement, that it's not split 50-50. Another reason it may not be split 50-50 is looking at particular categories of income. And so sometimes one party will earn more in a certain category of income, royalties, than in another category because they are more or less responsible for generating that income. So for instance, if I were a recording artist, I might say to the publisher, and I'm signing this agreement, you know what, as far as streaming royalties go, or mechanical royalties, however you want to talk about them, as far as streaming royalties go, I want to get 60% of those and you get 40. Because you know what, you have nothing to do with those royalties. I'm putting this record out with the record company. The record company is the one who's promoting this record and trying to get sales and investing, and you're just sitting back and you're collecting that income. You didn't do anything to help generate it, so I want more of that. Conversely, the publishing company might say, okay, maybe, I doubt it, but they might say, okay, with respect to that. But then you know what? If I get any sync deals, if I get this put into a movie for $100,000, if I get this put into an ad for $1 million, I want 60% of the publisher's share of that income because that income is due to my efforts. I spent a lot of time, effort, money, etc. trying to generate, and nothing to do with your record company and nothing to do with you. So I want a greater percentage of that income. So it's altogether possible to share in that regard. If you look at paragraph 5, which describes this money, you will see that what it says is, hey, I, the publisher, will share with you, the co-publisher, this money equally after I deduct a bunch of stuff. So it's not out of gross at all. It's out of some net income, and it even says net income. And I told you always be afraid when something says you're going to be paid a percentage of net income. And what is the strategy I told you to employ? If you do have to agree to net, then make sure it spells out specifically and narrowly, and sometimes with caps, as to what can be deducted from that gross to get to net before you split it with me. And here it does describe those things. So you can see a reflection of the bargaining power where you go, it's not just going to say net, it's going to describe what net is so you can't take advantage of me. So net in this circumstance is, I am the publisher, I'm taking in all this money, gross money, woo, all the money from licensing this stuff. Look, I got a pile of it here. What can I deduct before I split it with you? Well, number one, they're going to deduct the writer's royalties, which is completely appropriate. 50% of that money goes to the writer. So cut it in half, and now we got half the money left. And this is what should be split between the parties. Now there are some other things that they try to describe that they can deduct from this, and that is they can deduct an administrative fee of, I don't know, it says 10% or 15% or whatever. I would cross that out immediately. The publisher is getting their 25% precisely because they're doing this administrative work. That is what their job is under this agreement. It's not a really heavy exploitation thing because it's a recording artist. So I would cross that out. No administrative fee can be taken out. Some administrative costs. You could also argue that they should bear these costs, but usually you say, the publisher would say, we are both publishers here. We should both be responsible for absorbing the costs that go into getting this stuff taken care of. So you might have to agree to that. The important thing when you agree to somebody being able to deduct costs is that you outline what they are. You just try to describe specifically and narrowly what they are. Sometimes you put in language like saying only costs that are reasonable and customary in the industry, and that puts at least some psychological limit on what they can do, and you can sue them if they start to deduct all sorts of costs that are inappropriate that nobody ever does. Reasonable, customary in the industry. Also, it's got to be out-of-pocket costs, so they can't deduct any kind of salaries or other costs that they incur, rent of their building, and try to apportion some of it to you. So it's got to be out-of-pocket costs that go to third parties, nothing that goes within the company's expenditure. So as much limitation as you can put on what those costs are, the better you can be. So writer's royalties, okay. Administrative fee, no. Administrative costs, make sure you just try to say no. But if you can't, then put some limitations on what they can deduct. Also, you could put a cap, no single expenditure of over $1,000 without getting my permission, something like that. Finally, in this agreement, it says the publisher shall collect the performance royalties, the entire publisher share, which is 50% of the total income, but according to ASCAP, it will be a 100% of the publisher share. You want to avoid that. You want that money coming directly to you as the co-publisher. So I'll try to negotiate to get that out of there. All right, that's all the important money things there. And you can see that there's plenty of other paragraphs in there, and paragraphs that you've seen before that should look familiar, like old friends. Oh, look, there's my old friend accounting. Oh, my old friend indemnification. How are you, Demi? I don't know. You can see that the same provisions occur in all sorts of agreements. I hope you have some sort of knee reflex reaction to these particular provisions, that when you see something that's accounting in here and it says 90 days after the semi-annual period, you say, no, at least quarterly, and 45 days after the quarter. When it says you can't object to these statements after 1 year or 2 years, you say, no, get all that time limitation out of there, or at least make it 3 years that I have to object to that. When it says you'll absorb the whole cost of the audit as the writer, you say, no, I mean, I'll absorb the whole cost of the audit, but if I go and audit and it reveals that you underpaid me by X amount, then you pay the cost of the audit and make sure you pay me any kind of interest and other penalties on any unpaid amounts. So I hope you can see all those same things: notices, choice of law, what law is going to apply, where people can sue, the merger clause, etc., etc. I hope these things are becoming very familiar. We're going to go into one more agreement, and you'll see them again. You'll see them again and again and again. All right, I have another math problem for you, just demonstrating the simple split. Once again, these are very elemental problems in the world of publishing administration. I hope you take that class. You can see how complex this stuff gets. Number one, it's usually not dealing with these very, very tidy numbers that I'm giving to you, portions of half a cent and stuff like that. And, you know, quite often, most often, these songs are written by multiple parties with splits between them as to who gets how much and how much the publisher gets of a particular song, 1/6 of a song, 1/8 of a song, etc. So these can be pretty hard. This is just to introduce you to the normal split, and once again to calculate mechanical royalties as if they're still a thing. So here we go. My friend Zach Seabaugh, he signed a standard co-publishing agreement with Universal, and his publishing company, See Me Music, understanding once again that we've got to treat these parties as separate and distinct parties. The split is equal. That is 25, 25, 50. He puts out a record with 10 wholly written songs licensed to the record company at the 75% rate, and the record sells 2 million copies. 2 million copies. I forgot to do this problem. Let's do it together. So first and always, I want to figure out how much money is being earned. And, you know, it's always the same thing. You're licensing something to somebody, and you're associating a fee with that something that you're licensing out. So here the publishing company is licensing out songs for mechanical license to the record company. Each song of the 10 is being licensed at the 3/4 rate, which we just did. So that's 6.825 cents. And in decimal form, that's 0.06825. And they anticipate selling 2 million records. So that's 68.25 cents per record, because there's 10 songs on there, times those 2 million records. It's going to be twice what we had last time. So I'm going to do that with you. Can you do it with me? 682,500, 682,500. The total mechanicals are 5, 6. I hope I did this right. Holy crap, that's a lot of money. $1,365,100. $1,365,100. I hope I did that right. If not, you can tell me. Just use your calculator and do that. 6.825 times 10 times 2 million. So that would be the total mechanical royalties that have been received from the record company. UMPG share, CME share, ZAC share, that's 25, 25, and 50. So 50% of that is 682,500. That would be ZAC share, the writer share, 682,500. And the other 682,500 will be split equally between Universal Music and CME Music. So that's $341,250. So UMPG share is $341,250. CME share, $341,250. Those both represent 1/4 of the total income. And ZAC, the writer, 50%, $682,500. That's the answer there. All right, so there we are at the nice little 25-minute mark. I do have an additional problem there, having to deal with if there is a if there's an administrative fee, how this changes the equation. But I'll go into that when we review some of these other kinds of things. You will notice that the last page here, where is it? If you keep scrolling, train keeps scrolling, no, not alone. Questions for the admin agreement. We got one more real publishing agreement. Remembering that there's 3 types. And they can vary and they can be hybrids and stuff like that, but it's the full. We read that, we summarized it, we love it, we know how it works. We have the COPUB we just did, and now we have the admin agreement, which is the best agreement you can sign as a writer because you're maintaining all ownership of it. It's a short-term deal. You get all your stuff back after a very short period of time. Make another deal with them or with somebody else, and you keep the majority of the money. So I will be sending that out to you. By the time you've read this, it will be in your mailbox. And instead of summarizing the agreement, I have a series of questions for you. Now, I know from watching my kids do homework that when you have a reading and you have questions associated with the reading, the way you do is you read the question and then you look for the answer like a treasure hunt, scavenger hunt, or Where's Waldo or something. That's really not the way to do this. The way to do it is to read the agreement, just so you're getting better at that. This has got some complex stuff to it. Don't pay too much attention to the print music royalty stuff. That's a bulk of that stuff is in there. But I want you to read through the agreement once just so you're getting used to it. So it'll take you like 10 or 15 minutes. And then, with that knowledge of having read it, it'll be easy for you to find the answers here. And so I want you to submit this to a Dropbox I'm going to create, the answers to the 9 questions I have there. And that will be due, what is today? That'll be due Tuesday at midnight. And then I'll go over some math, I'll go over the admin agreement, and we'll be done with the publishing agreements and can move on to some quick kind of licensing stuff before we get the heck out of Dodge here. All right, so be sure to email me with any questions. These 2 videos will be up. Learn them, know them. Read the agreement that I sent to you, the admin agreement. Answer these questions by Tuesday at midnight, and then Wednesday we'll get together and try to put this sucker to bed. Okay? So, hope you're doing fine. Hope you're staying safe. Hope you're being productive. With all the terrible implications of what's happening, not the least of which is death and just horrible, horrible stuff. There are some things, spending time together with your family who you're quarantined with, spending some time with yourself and some reflection upon you and your life and your goals. There are some ways to be productive and to try to make the most out of what's going on. Learning publishing, that's one thing you can do. But I miss you guys. This is terrible having to do this by myself and or even remotely with Zoom. I like people. I'm an extrovert. I get my energy from people. And right now all I got is my son, and he don't want no part of my energy. So let me know if you have any questions, and let's keep moving. We only got a couple more weeks.